Um, well, thank you, President Michael. It's always a special event when a club member is actually our guest speaker, and today won't be an exception. It does raise this rather awkward but somewhat charming situation when one member, whom everybody knows, is introduced by another one whom everybody also knows. Anyway, it's my great pleasure and honor this morning to introduce Rotarian Helen Peacock to you. Helen is a relatively recent member of our club, joined a couple of years ago, right around the time when she first became involved, engaged, you might say, in learning about conflict and the futility and destruction of war, and in working with people, anyone really, who had similar interests and concerns. Since then, she's been on a journey of learning and activism that has seen her become a local guru on peace and conflict, and certainly a leader in building a grassroots expression of the desire to end war, the scourge of war. She's enlisted, that's probably not a good word because of its military connotation. She's enlisted many of us, both here and in other communities, some of whom are our guests this morning. And she's been instrumental in setting up a branch of a worldwide organization called World Beyond War, and in setting up its local chapter called Pivot to Peace. The part that I find most interesting about Helen is her Rotary journey. She is for sure someone who sees Rotary as a force for good in the world. She's been face to face with some of the internal political machinations of Rotary that even made her wonder whether it was a place where she belonged. And she went through a long thought process there, and thankfully came out of the process with a big yes as her answer. And I think it's all quite remarkable because she's grasped what Rotary is, whatever we make of it. It's whatever we can persuade our fellow Rotarians to do to improve the state of the world. And in that sense, Rotary is a profoundly political organization, which at its very best is engaged in determining where the world should go. And it's one which in many ways stands well above the partisan fray of how it gets there. So Helen, for me, brings to mind that parable of Tommy Douglas called Mouseland about the importance of ideas. And presently there came along one person who had an idea. My friends, watch out for the person with an idea. Let me remind you that you can reject or ignore an idea, but if it's a good one, its day will come. Helen's got a good idea, and more than one actually. And so over to you, Helen.
Thanks, Lauren, for that introduction. Just let me take a moment and screen share here. I was thinking while Lauren was talking that it's been about almost 2 years since I last spoke to our club. And I do appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for speaking again. And also thanks to all our guests who have tuned in from various perspectives on peace. When I did talk to you, I guess 2 years ago, I was very much wearing my Pivot to Peace and my World Beyond War hat. And I was sharing what I'd been learning through World Beyond War and how we were setting up this peace movement here in Collingwood. And I wasn't really thinking of myself then, even though I was a member of Rotary, I wasn't really thinking of myself as a Rotarian. And I was thinking today, I definitely feel that I'm a Rotarian. And I guess part of this presentation is to take you along the journey that I went along to get to this point. And my question is very sincere. Is the idea of world peace, and by peace I mean the absence of war as a choice to resolve conflict, is that idea just a pipe dream, or is it truly a possibility? And my other favorite question, of course, is everybody hearing me?
Yes.
Okay, good.
We are.
Yes.
is why is there still war? I mean, seriously, if survey after survey all around the world indicates that people prefer peace, why is there still war? So before we get into talking about this more, I want to tell two stories. And one is an experience that Dave and I had March 1st of last year, just before the sort of awareness of the severity of the pandemic was out there. And we were in Panama City to be exact, and we were remembering the Panama invasion. I had watched it on TV, and we were learning that most of the invasion had been concentrated in a part of Panama City called El Chorrillo, which, as you can see, looks very different than downtown Panama City. And we wanted to go to El Chorrillo, and we asked our friendly hotel concierge for assistance, and he said, "No, I don't recommend you go there, and I can't guarantee your safety." So we were a little bit unsettled by that, but took it with a grain of salt. We talked to a friend we'd made on the street, and he said, yes, he would take us on the condition that we would slump down in his car and we would promise never to get out. And we said, what's the problem? We're Canadian. He said, it doesn't matter. They will think you're American. And I'm not just concerned for your safety, I'm concerned for my safety too, because I'll be with you. So we slumped down in the car and we went into El Chorrillo, and literally within moments, we saw this very angry, fresh mural on the wall. And you can see American helicopters and military personnel. And this says in Spanish, never forget, never forgive. And we're thinking this happened 30 years ago. Never forget, never forgive. And what we weren't appreciating was that 4,000 civilians were killed in the Panama invasion. And what we weren't appreciating was the incredible trauma that was inflicted on El Chorrillo with an invasion of 20,000 US troops coming by air, by sea, by land in the middle of the night, 5 days before Christmas. And all I could think was, how come I didn't know that? Why was I not more aware at the time? I watched the coverage on TV, and I did not know that. And so we'll come back to that in a moment. The other story I want to tell you now is more recent. It's about the war in Yemen. And I heard this from Kathy Kelly last summer, and I truly have not been able to get it out of my mind ever since. And I'll let her tell you the story in her words.
Telling a story that troubles me deeply. I learned of it through Jeffrey Stern writing for the New York Times Magazine. And it's about a very remote district in Yemen called Arhab. And the people in Arhab were facing a really alarming situation. They were running out of water, like, thirsty animals that would starve, and plants that can't be irrigated, and families that need water. So they took a gamble. They pooled money together and they bought a rig. And they were really hoping this rig would work and it could dig deeper and deeper for water. No water. The rig broke twice. They had it mired in mud. It looked as though all of the money they borrowed and pooled was not going to work. They were doomed. And then one night they struck water. Well, you can imagine, Eureka. There was celebration, there was dancing, there was singing until the wee hours of the morning. And then people that were part of the celebration, men, I suppose all men, were staggering back to their homes in the dark. And what they didn't know is that overhead was a huge missile that had been made in the United States by Raytheon, sold to the Saudis, and the Saudis had targeted their celebration. And so when this missile, a Paveway missile, exploded, these shards of steel went flying through the air 8 times faster than the speed of sound. People were disemboweled, they were beheaded, they were maimed, and many were killed. The next morning, people who'd heard the explosions and whose loved ones hadn't returned went out to find out what happened. And, some people couldn't restrain the children, and children are curious. So 100 people had assembled at exactly that spot where the first bomb had hit. And then new waves of warplanes, Saudi warplanes, using United States guidance and surveillance and US weapons, attacked that group. People said they were diving into the cornfields, they were running for their lives. They describe it as extermination. 42 people were badly wounded, taken in a long distance to a hospital. 36 people had been killed. And the people in our hub were doing a good thing. They pooled their resources to try to find water. And so I see this as a story of peace literacy that's so needed all across the United States, all across the world. We have to become literate in the stories of those who bear the brunt of our wars.
We have to become literate in the stories of those who bear the brunt of our wars, because when we do become literate, we will stop war. So taking a moment to step back and look at some of the questions that I had when I first joined Rotary, and using some of the distinctions that we've got from our partner, the Institute of Economics and Peace. We're all familiar with the distinction between negative peace and positive peace. And we know that Rotary is very much focused in a wonderful way on positive peace. And our peace centers and our Rotary fellows, I meet Rotary fellows in the work I'm doing with World Beyond War all the time, and the thousands of projects that we have around the world. But my question is, war is the greatest threat to peace. What is Rotary doing to help end war? These were questions I had at the beginning. From the Institute of Economics and Peace, we understand the economic impact of violence. Now, I knew that we were spending $2 trillion taxpayer dollars a year on war and the preparations for war, but I didn't recognize and appreciate that the impact was even 3 times greater. And so my question is, war is development in reverse. What is Rotary doing to help shift these dollars that are going into military and help them shift them to positive peace building purposes? And finally, from the Institute of Economics and Peace, we have a distinction between a clock problem and a cloud problem. Clock problems, we can take them apart and we can analyze them and we can fix them. Cloud problems are systemic, they're dynamic. We have to look at them in a holistic, big picture way if we're going to make positive shifts. And I think we can all agree we need clock and cloud solutions to end war and build positive peace. And my question was, given that Rotary has this voice at the UN and this presence around the world, how is it using the world stage to advocate for cloud solutions to shift to a global peace culture? And I, given my background with World Beyond War, very much wanted to work on ending war as well as building peace, wanted to work on making people aware of this huge dollar investment that isn't addressing human security needs, that needs to be redirected. And I wanted to look at the big picture and recognize that there was this huge industrial military machine out there that was undoing all our good deeds. And I didn't feel comfortable ignoring it, basically. And so I had come to the conclusion then, I didn't see how sort of what I wanted to do was aligned with Rotary's priorities. And I left. I actually resigned from Rotary in June of 2020. But I wasn't gone for long. Within a few weeks, I was back, having been asked to return as the district peace chair for our district, and having been given this mandate, which was for me a mandate from heaven to, yes, talk about and promote the positive peace initiatives that Rotary was doing, but also, yes, talk about what we needed to be doing to end war. And I believed at that time that Rotarians would be very interested in what was happening with the Canadian peace movement, for example, and we had just become, Pivot to Peace had just become part of the newly formed Canadian Global Alliance for Peace and Justice. And I thought that Canadians would be interested in what was happening politically in our country as well. Peace around the topic of peace. But this mandate actually only lasted about a week or maybe 10 days. And I received, I guess there was a complaint from Rotary International. I received basically a request that I focus only on the initiatives, the peace initiatives that were being done in our district, when I asked specifically which ones, the Rotary Peace Centers and our Rotary Scholars Program, our Rotary Fellows Program. So this put me in a real quandary, because now I'm back in Rotary and I'm not feeling comfortable that I would just leave again. It didn't feel right. And by now I had convinced myself there had to be synergies between World Beyond War's mandate to end war and Rotary's mandate to build positive peace. I mean, there just had to be. And so I decided I would just kind of hunker down and do as much learning as I could. And I had a lot to learn about Rotary. So I talked to different district peace chairs. I went to a bunch of peace conferences, podcasts, speaker events. I took every online course that that Rotary Action Group for Peace and the Institute of Economics and Peace were offering. I took 3 courses from World Beyond War. I was busy. And when I talked with the district peace chairs, I realized that the mandate of a peace chair actually can vary considerably from one district to the next. And I even talked to a district peace chair in Colorado who had taken his peace committee and formally affiliated it with World Beyond War, which was way more than I had thought of doing in our district. And there was another district peace chair who sent me an email after we talked, maybe 2 days later, and it just had one sentence in capital letters: "Don't give up, Helen." And that made me smile, and I kind of, okay. And then there was another area where I was learning a lot. I found myself on the receiving end of at least 30 emails per week that were coming from a group of Rotarians working within Rotary to prevent nuclear war. And as I was doing my learning, I actually became 100% convinced that Rotary could be instrumental in shifting our planet to peace. And I want to just highlight a couple of the events that were so convincing for me. One was I felt like a fly on the wall. I attended, and we can do this with the beauty of Zoom right now, a Rotary Peace Conference put on by a Rotary Club in India and a Rotary Club in Pakistan. And I felt like a fly on the wall in this conference. I didn't know anyone, but here they were, 2 nuclear powered countries with a contested border between them, and leaders who could be sort of fundamentalist and black and white in their thinking. And here they were talking about how they could diffuse the tensions and prevent, because there was a very real possibility of nuclear war. And I was in another, this was a podcast, and it was about Russia. And I just want to remind everybody that Russia has a GDP less than Canada. So when we hear all the language that we're hearing around the threat of Russia, just please put that in perspective. But the talk was about what to do about Russia. And a question came from the audience. As it turns out, she was one of these group of Rotarians working within Rotary to prevent nuclear war. And she said, has anyone ever thought of actually talking to the Russian people? And so afterwards, I looked that up, and Rotary has 77 clubs in Russia. Think about that. It's fantastic. And there actually are inter-country committees between Russia and the US, between Russia and Canada. So what an opportunity for dialogue and diffusing tensions and allowing peace. And then there was the Rotary Peace Incubator Conference, which I already told you about, in which we kind of got to be the first team of young people who are going to participate in the worldwide Youth Peace Building Education to Action project. And that was just so exciting. It just met all my needs for synergy between World Beyond War and Rotary, because it was a partnership between World Beyond War and Rotary Action Group for Peace that was going to make this happen. And now we come to the 30+ emails. And what I ended up doing was putting them all in a particular box in my email and looking at them over the weekend and coming to the recognition that I was a peace activist, and I really didn't have the nuclear threat on my radar screen. I wasn't really considering it. It's so much so that, well, yet there was this group of Rotarians, and honestly, I think that they were waking up in the morning and asking themselves, what can I do today to prevent nuclear catastrophe? And when they were falling asleep at night, they were asking themselves, did I do enough today to prevent nuclear catastrophe? So there was a lot for me to learn here. And in the process of sorting through these emails, I had my own aha moment. My husband, Dave, was throwing out 3 bins of books, and I'm sort of hovering over him, feeling some anxiety. And I grabbed this one and I save it. And this was a book that was meaningful to me in the 80s, because it was about how consciousness shifts. And I'm very interested in that and have been a student of that for 30 years. And it very briefly, it's this true story of how a group of scientists on an island off of Japan observed the Japanese monkey over 30 years. And at one point, they started dropping sweet potatoes in the sand. And the monkeys loved the sweet potatoes, but they did not like the grit on the potatoes. And then one day, an 18-month-old female monkey took her sweet potato and rinsed it in a stream. And she loved it. Got the habit and together, and over time, there was some 90 monkeys who had adopted the habit. And then one day, one new monkey went to the stream, having never done it before, and washed his sweet potato in the stream. And almost overnight, the added energy of that monkey was a tipping point, and the entire tribe adopted the habit of washing their sweet potatoes in the stream. And this is how consciousness shifts. We don't need 100% of the population to change their mind. We only need a small percentage of the population to change your mind. And we'll come back to this in a moment, but we know intuitively that this is true. But what was mind-boggling for me was I remembered this book as a book about how consciousness shifts. I had no recollection that it was a book about preventing nuclear war. So that's how much nuclear war was not on my radar screen. So here I am getting these emails, and I'm learning. This is, I'm learning. First of all, the culture of denial. Well, of course, I wasn't thinking about the culture of denial. I was part of the culture of denial. And it's pervasive in our culture. Another thing I hadn't thought about was what I call the war game mindset. Think about this: thousands of military personnel who are training continually so that they can launch a nuclear weapon in minutes. Think about the sort of consciousness behind that kind of effort, and think about the fact that we are asking our fellow human beings to train to destroy our planet. I didn't think about this. It's just so undemocratic. I mean, in most countries, it's hard to go to war. There's constitutional requirements, but we have got a system set up where just a few people can make a decision that can affect a billion of us. It's completely undemocratic. One of the presentations I attended was a presentation on the potential for error. I know Ralph is very familiar with this. I think Ralph is here today. And the presenter laid out a timeline from World War II to today, and said that there were more than 50 times when we came extremely close to nuclear disaster. I didn't know that, but of course, the nuclear industry doesn't want us to know that. I had no idea. And then this first strike doctrine of the United States, whereby they reserve the right to drop a nuclear bomb on you if they think there's a possibility that you might drop a nuclear bomb on them. Think of the level of anxiety that creates on our planet. Think of the level of preparedness that other countries have to be at. Think of the fear that's indoctrinated by this doctrine. Everybody knows that the states invaded Iraq on a pretext. So it's anxiety inducing. And here's another one. I didn't quite grasp this at the beginning. I mean, we haven't used nuclear weapons, have we, since World War II? And yet, if I hold you up with a gun and I rob you and I don't shoot you, but have I used the gun? Yes, I have. And that was another presentation. This just documented or talked about the 30 plus times that we know of that the United States has threatened to use a bomb. We don't know about the other nuclear countries. I don't know about the other nuclear countries. And again, think about the kind of fear that that is engendering. And finally, I don't need to go in this. It's just so obvious, the staggering waste of money and the fact that now there's a push to modernize. It's mind-boggling. So when we look at the 13,500 warheads on the planet, and when we recognize that some of them are 50 times the power of Hiroshima, those of us who are on the outside of the industrial, military, and political complex can clearly see that it just doesn't make sense. So I was learning that. And coming back to my question again of why is there still war? Why has this been allowed to escalate to this point in terms of the nuclear situation? I think that we typically get this kind of answer. War is inevitable. It's part of human nature. It's always been there. War is necessary. There are times when we have to be able to defend ourselves. War can be justified. There are times there really is such a thing as a just war. And also the argument that the industrial military complex is too powerful politically and economically, and it would be, we would lose too many jobs. And so Rotarians ask, is this truly true? Is it the truth? Is war truly inevitable? And the fact of the matter is that conflict may be inevitable, but war is a choice. I mean, China went 500 years without a war. The countries in Western Europe are fighting all the time, and they've gone the last 75 years without a war. So conflict may be inevitable, but war is a choice. And research today, I mean, we still have a bit of the mentality at the end of the Second World War, and we're not recognizing all of the research that has been done since then. And it proves conclusively that nonviolent resistance is at least twice as likely to be successful as violent resistance. And then this whole argument about a just war. A just war can only happen when it's the last resort. And since nonviolent alternatives are proving unlimited, it really, there is no such thing. It can't be the last resort. And finally, the power of the industrial military complex. When enough people are educated on the suffering of victims and the environmental destruction of war, war is a #1 polluter of our environment. We cannot solve the climate crisis if we allow war to continue. When enough people understand that, the political support will disappear. And quite frankly, war profiteering is not really a respected part of our society. My husband put this graph together for me showing that the S&P went up by 150% between 9/11 and 2019, while Lockheed Martin went up by 1,742%. I mean, it's not right. So back to the question, why is there still war? And there's really only one answer. Applying the scientific method to search for correlations between war and other factors, Horgan and many others found only one answer. Wars are made by cultures that celebrate or tolerate war. And you can accept something even while telling a pollster you oppose it. Real opposition takes work. So I think that we in the global north are living in a culture that tolerates war. And we can think of the culture, we can think of it like an iceberg. The 250 wars since the end of World War II are the tip of the iceberg. But the culture of war is way broader and way deeper and exists continually in our heads and our books and our toys and our games and our education systems and historical markers and sporting events and our ads and our remembrance days. Last year on Remembrance Day, there were 7 pages in the Globe and Mail about Remembrance Day. Now remember, Remembrance Day was originally called Armistice Day and was meant to celebrate the peace. So the Globe and Mail had 7 pages on Remembrance Day, and the word peace was never mentioned once. So this is what I mean about the culture of war. Einstein said there is no problem that can be fixed from the same level of consciousness that created it. And we know from the 100th monkey that just the addition of that 100th monkey was a tipping point for the entire tribe. But then what I didn't tell you was that something incredibly miraculous happened. And the habit of washing the sweet potatoes jumped over the sea. And monkeys on the mainland started washing their sweet potatoes, and monkeys on neighboring islands started washing their sweet potatoes. As if there was a point when just that one more person tuned in, and the awareness was then picked up by almost everyone. And again, we know intuitively that this is true. We saw how #MeToo, there was just one more thing and it exploded in our consciousness. And Black Lives Matter exploded in our consciousness. Or even we can think back to the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall fell on a weekend. So we know that this is true. And I have come to believe that Rotarians can bring that awareness to shifting our world to peace, because we're in Russia, we are in India, we are in Pakistan, and we have the potential to really bring that awareness to shift our planet. So what does it take to raise peace consciousness? Kathy Kelly said, we have to become literate to the stories of those who bear the brunt of our wars. Now, Jeffrey Stern is a reporter for New York Times Magazine. He actually went to Yemen, he went to Ahad, he found the remnants of the first bomb that had been dropped. He found the serial number on the bomb, and he traced it back to a plant in Arizona where the bomb had been built. And he interviewed 3 people who worked in that plant, and he found that actually morale was really high in this plant, really high, because they believed that they were protecting the lives of military personnel. These bombs could be dropped from a great height, so the risk of return enemy fire was very low. And these bombs could be targeted so specifically within meters of their target, so the risk of civilian casualties would be extremely low. This is what they believed. But it was more than just believing they could keep the military safe. The factory had blown up pictures of members of the military on their walls. And these were members of the military related to people who were working in the factory. So it was even more personal than that. So Raytheon had a very clever way of keeping morale up in a factory that was building incredible destruction. And suffice it to say, when the 3 people that Jeffrey Stern talked to learned what had actually been done with their bomb, they were horrified. And Simon Black, who is a professor of labor at Brock University and the founder of the Coalition of Labor Against the Arms Trade, which has been endorsed by every labor organization in Canada, said that if we bothered to ask the people who work in these factories, we would find that they would infinitely prefer to be doing life-affirming work rather than the work that they are doing. So we have to become literate. We also have to recognize the degree to which we need to dismantle the military thinking in our own mind. And I come back to the Panama invasion. This was the coverage we were getting in the papers. And of course we had to get Noriega. I mean, he was a drug dealer and he was ruining the lives of millions of Americans, of American kids. So of course we had to get him. And you may not be able to see this headline on the left, but it says, the president says he had no choice. We're always being told that there was no choice. And yet we know that there are unlimited possibilities before war. But it wasn't just that. We watched a documentary called The Panama Deception, and we actually learned that television sold the Panama invasion. The television anchors talked about our troops are doing well and we're doing great, and as if they were members of the force, and there was not a mention. They analyzed all the television coverage over this period, and there was not a mention of the dead civilians and no questioning of the reason for the invasion, which of course had nothing to do with Noriega being a drug dealer and everything to do with the fact that Noriega was no longer playing ball with US plans for Nicaragua. And my personal favorite was one night on the NBC Nightly News, the US military occupiers were described as engaging in peacekeeping chores, while the Latin American diplomats who objected were condemned as a lynch mob. Now, I don't think that our television anchors were consciously selling us the war. I think it was unconscious. And this is what I'm talking about. We all have to kind of wake up to how this can happen. But at least we knew that there had been a Panama invasion, because 2 days later, Dave and I were talking to 2 American tourists at the Panama Canal, and we told them about the documentary, and they said, "What? I didn't know Panama was invaded. Who would want to invade Panama?" So at least we knew there had been the invasion. And finally, we want to get to the place where the very idea of a just war just sounds as offensive to us as a charitable rape or humanitarian slavery or benevolent child abuse. And I know it's possible that we can get to that place because that's the way I feel now. So how can Rotary make the biggest impact on raising peace consciousness? Well, I had these three questions. You know, what is Rotary doing to prevent war? How is Rotary helping to shift these military dollars to positive keeping? And what are the sort of big picture cloud solutions that Rotary can be advocating using its voice on the world stage? And we consult the scientists for how to deal best with the pandemic. We should consult the scientists on this question as well. And I watched the unveiling of the doomsday clock this year. I was very interested. They left it, as you know, at 100 seconds to midnight, the closest that it's ever been. And they had three reasons for this: possible even more future devastating pandemics, the worsening climate crisis, and the acceleration of the nuclear weapons program. And I think if we're going to listen to the scientists, we want to start by becoming familiar and aware of the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which went into force on January 22nd of this year. And we want to be giving it our full support. If you think about it, we had comprehensive treaties for chemical weapons and biological weapons, but not for nuclear, not until now. So now we do. And the treaty prohibits development, testing, et cetera, of nuclear weapons with the ultimate goal of being their total elimination. And it helps stigmatize nuclear weapons in the same way that chemical and biological weapons were stigmatized, and it serves as a catalyst for their eventual elimination. Now, 86 states have signed the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and 54 states have ratified it. And 69 nations did not vote and did not participate, including all the NATO countries, including Canada. So coming back to how can Rotary make the biggest impact on raising peace consciousness, it could start by advocating for worldwide support of the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Now, I think I can read your minds, and I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, but, when is Helen going to get it through her thick skull that Rotary can't get involved politically? When will she ever figure that out? And I looked up some words. I just think that that is not factually correct. It simply is not a fact. And I base this on the fact that I read Rotary magazine in February of this year. How did Rotary eradicate polio in Africa? I read it, the story cover to cover, and there were 4 major challenges that Rotary faced in eradicating polio: conflict, rumors, hard to reach children, and political will. So how did Rotary approach the issue of conflict? It negotiated truces and military protection. That sounds political to me. How did Rotary handle the issue of the rumors around vaccinations becoming a political thing? They advocated with government leaders and educated the public. Advocated with government leaders. That sounds political to me. How did Rotary get to the hard to reach children? Well, borders are very porous. So the cross-border campaigns had to be coordinated. What a concept. Rotary coordinated with surrounding nations. That sounds political to me. And finally, my personal favorite, political will. Rotary members used their respected roles in society and often their personal charisma to advocate for their governments to become active in polio eradication. That sounds political too. If that's not political, I don't know what is. So I think it would be far more accurate for us to recognize that it's not that Rotary can't get involved politically, it's that Rotary can't be partisan. We could just as easily substitute worldwide support for the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, where we have eradicating polio. We could just substitute it in, and these 4 strategies would be the same. We already know how to do it. We've already done it once. The strategies would be the same. So when we think about how we did it, in a nonpartisan way to save lives, Rotarians can be brilliantly and effectively political. There's just no question. So what would be a first step? Well, a first step would be to educate Rotarians. And this is an easy one. We could apply the four-way test. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will prevail? Is it beneficial? And of course, worldwide support of the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, leading to the elimination of nuclear weapons. The answer has to be yes, 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 and yes. But that's not going to be enough to convince our fellow Rotarians. This last year, a resolution went forth from our district actually requesting that the Rotary International Board consider supporting approval of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And what was the result? Rejected by more than 2-1. Now, I don't think that our fellow Rotarians were rejecting the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I think a lot of these votes were done unconsciously, in the same way that the media was unconsciously selling us on the Panama invasion. So I think with education, we can change that. So next year, the resolution will go forward, hopefully more strongly worded, to request that Rotary International endorse the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And hopefully next year, the result will be adopted. And again, it's going to come back to the efforts of all of us around education, education, education. I don't think that it will be as difficult as we might be anticipating. In the half a dozen peace conferences, Rotary peace conferences that I went to, I heard our incoming president, Czech Armeda, speak many, many times. And as you probably know, he is a supporter of the TPNW, and he did sign the Japanese Survivors' Appeal to support the TPNW. And I heard him say things like, we shouldn't be arming ourselves with weapons that we won't use. And we shouldn't be spending money on clean water. It's way more important. We should be spending money on clean water. It's way more important than on the arms race. And I heard him say thoughtfully, most recently, that he felt that we could be doing more at the UN with our representative network. And he also had a goal of growing Rotary to 1.3 million people. And his suggestion for doing that was that every Rotarian bring a friend. I don't know that that suggestion is going to work. Rotary membership has been flat at 1.2 million people for a number of years now. And I think a lot of Rotarians have exhausted the friends that they could bring. So I'm not sure that that is the best way to grow Rotary. I think that we could recognize what's happening around the world outside of the industrial military political complex. And remember, I said that those of us outside can see that nuclear weapons make no sense. And in fact, recent polls have shown since the approval of the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons that 70 to 80% of citizens in Belgium, Iceland, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, Germany, the UK, Canada, and Japan support the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And so by endorsing the treaty, Rotary can be speaking for this 70 to 80% of our population. It can be giving them a voice, can be amplifying their voice. And it just occurs to me that this could be a wonderful way of growing membership, just a wonderful way of getting people engaged and appreciating the work of Rotary. So I come back to my question from the very beginning. Can Rotarians be the tipping point in making world peace a possibility rather than just a pipe dream? And could we take on advocating worldwide support for the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons? Because that would definitely make peace possible. What do you think? Thank you for listening. Oops.
Okay, thank you so much, Helen. What we're going to do now is have a very brief poll that we're going to attempt to launch and put in place. And please bear with us. It should only take you a couple minutes to handle the poll, and then we'll see if there's any appetite for question and answers and thanking the speaker. So just bear with me for a couple of seconds here.